All right, let's bring you this discussion now. This week, Parliament continuing with discussions around budgets for different departments. And today, the Social Development Minister, that's Sisisi Tolashe, will present her spending plans for her department. Now, that department provides services to protect and support vulnerable people. It also collaborates, or at least is meant to, with partners to empower individuals and communities in need. To give us their perspective, let's bring in Matshidiso Lencoasa, who's a researcher from Section 27 and is with us here in our studios in Auckland Park. Lovely to see you. Thanks very much indeed for popping by. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So we really are spoiled for choice about where to start, especially when you consider the work done by a number of organizations in the country to augment what government is meant to do. And that's really, I suppose, the heart of the relationship that's meant to exist. As a start, before we speak about your own priorities, how would you describe that relationship between the state and NGOs and civil society organizations so far?
Sure. So in order to understand the relationship that the state and NGOs and other stakeholders play in this, I think we need to realize that, and maybe to take reference to what Judge Defo had said in the Life Esidimeni case, is that when the state provides social protection as per the Constitution, it creates a relationship or a caregiving relationship which ends up being a legal duty. And when the state is unable to fulfill that legal duty, it also fails to provide when it fails to provide that protection, it fails to provide that legal duty. And so it is crucial, because it's a constitutionally protected right to social protection in various parts of the Constitution. It is crucial that the state does its best, or is best positioned to be a caregiver, and that's where NGOs and various other stakeholders come in, and just really does build the capacity of the state to provide that care for the people of this country who really need it.
Yeah, and you know, throughout the past few years, some NGOs have come out, especially at, I think, a provincial and maybe a local government level, to say that in some ways they feel let down by the state because that support that's needed in order to see through what you've just painted out for us isn't necessarily there. And I wonder, with that in mind, where you reckon this minister can start to try rebuild that trust in that relationship.
Sure. I mean, it's understandable. While the Department of Social Development has made some progress in some areas, it is understandable that many of the players in the social development space are feeling let down, particularly NGOs. We're seeing reports in the Western Cape and in Gauteng of NGOs of budget cuts towards social development that has resulted in NGOs either not being paid and having to halt their services and halt their ability to provide protective services, social protection for vulnerable people in this country. And so I think the budget is really, there are all eyes on this budget, not just this budget, but also just over the next 5 years, is how will the new administration, how will this minister be able to, how will they make decisions? And it's not just social development, it's the states in general. We hope to see the state working together in this, but how will we best position the states to provide social protection services in a context of weakening economic growth, unfortunate economic climates? And really that also just speaks to, as I was saying, it's a government of unity, and we're hoping that that unity and working together is one of the key priorities in social development and in providing these services. So we're hoping to see, for instance, you have the Minister of Finance, or the Treasury in general, saying one story about providing universal basic income, but then on the other hand, you have social development and the recognition or recommendations of providing this social protection for, in a context where an economy has failed to provide, to create jobs or meaningful employment for many people in this country. And so we would like to see a consistent message and those departments working together. We'd like to see departments that are like social development working with other departments, like for instance on our industrial policy, so we can grow our economy, make more money, and fund and better fund social protection services, so we don't have an issue of NGOs not being paid and having to halt their services, but also we learn from the errors or the unfortunate incidences, like Life Esidimeni, for example.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you about that, the synergy that should exist between social development and under the departments, and you've touched on that in some ways, because often we speak about this concept of a capable state. And it's very hard to achieve that with departments working in silos. For example, if we are going to be able to protect children, I find it difficult for the social development department not in some ways to reach out to the basic education department about ways in which support can be provided for children who only have their one meal at school through the school nutrition program, as an example.
Absolutely. And you're so correct in that we really do want to see working together. Like, yes, we have a coalition government, and a lot of the narrative is around the parliamentary processes or different political parties working together. But we'd also like to see this as an opportunity for government departments to strengthen that collaboration and really in that build a capable state, especially in a context where our economy is not growing at the rates that it should be, and also that our debt is expensive and we've almost exhausted our options in terms of taxes. So how are we going to generate more money? How are we going to build a capable state? Well, we need to be more resourceful. And one of the most powerful ways to do that is for government departments to work together. Yep. Like you mentioned, with school nutrition. Can we scale school nutrition as we're seeing in the Eastern Cape? There are growing concerns of growing poverty, growing child poverty, but also nutrition issues or hunger. There's growing child hunger, and now that's where DSD, social development, basic education come in, health comes in, but also the more departments like finance, so treasury, but also the Department of Trade and Industry. So really looking at it as sector-wide and not just, the social spaces versus the economic departments, but just everything in general working together.
Absolutely. You've cited Life Esetimeni a number of times in our discussion. And what really stands out in that tragedy is that a number of NGOs had tried to sound the alarm way before the tragedy took place itself. I think yours is among them. And that raises questions around the extent to which government is hearing NGOs. It's one thing to have these multi-stakeholder engagements, to perhaps put aside money for these NGOs, all of which is very important, right? But do these organizations, does your organization, Section 27, feel that you have government's ear, whether it comes to bringing forward your own solutions or trying to warn the state about taking certain directions? Sure.
I think that, public participation and having a strong relationship between the state and the state listening to the stakeholders and the intended beneficiaries is crucial, and it's a hard-won freedom. That was having parliamentary processes, submissions to parliament, all those kind of interventions of which, as Section 27 and other NGOs form part and participate in those processes. I think that those are hard-won freedoms, and if the state does not continue to prioritize that in this next administration, we might regress in that. I think, as you're mentioning and capturing it really well, that this is an opportunity to scale that so that we can really create policy, social policy, but also a budget that is for the people, by the people, and that really reflects the lived experiences, the realities, and the NGOs, the work that is being done on the ground. So it's not an imposition, but rather a collaboration across the country of different stakeholders in actually better positioning the state to give social protection.
Yeah. A big debate that's kind of dominated our lead up to the elections and perhaps has kind of fallen by the wayside is whether or not we live in a country where we need some kind of basic income grant. I know there's been all manner of submissions. Currently, the 350 Rand, the SD grant is still in place, is it? I think so. And, on the back of that, there's been that discussion, should we create that kind of welfare in our state? Or, are there other interventions that could be put forward? I wonder what Section 27 believes, especially because this is an issue that might have dominated discussions around today's budget.
Sure. So I think that's an important question because it's important to also consider the context. So we live in a country that 30 years post-democracy, we have seen that our economy, unfortunately, has not been able to create meaningful employment for the majority of people, particularly young people, particularly young black women. And so then something's got to give. You know, these people, we need to be empowered to participate in the economy. And yes, on the one hand, we need, you know, the different agents to be growing the economy so that we can create more employment, but also the state has an obligation to provide social protection. And we saw this with the COVID relief, this SRD grants, is that it was supposed to be a temporary measure, but the impact that the pandemic has had on already a struggling economy, as our, you know, we're struggling to grow at the rate that we should be. We now know that there needs to be some form of social protection while we also create those jobs. So again, speaking to this theme of the discussion we've had of departments needing to work together. And so in that, you know, many of the political parties who are represented in the GNU, who are represented in Parliament, did run on a ticket of promising that social protection to their marginalized people. And so it is, you know, we're looking to see how they're actually going to achieve that. And we're looking to see a consistent message from the Department of Social Development and Treasury to say that, you know, we made these promises to our electorate, to the people of this country. Here's how we're going to realize that.
Yeah, and hopefully they do. Matshidiso Lencoasa, thanks very much indeed for popping by. We appreciate your take on the agenda. Matshidiso, of course, a researcher with Section 27, as we count down to today's budget from the Social Development Department, coming, of course, at a time where a number of departments have also laid out their spending plans. Once again, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us.